The transfer portal has been open for about a month, and Syracuse football has made some additions and have, of course, addressed a few needs. But let's talk about the biggest remaining needs for Syracuse this offseason.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, on this edition of Locked On Syracuse, we are going over some of the biggest remaining needs for the Orange in the transfer portal and this offseason in general. That's how we're going to start the podcast. We are also going to talk about positional groups that need to be sorted out. They could look to add in the portal, but also maybe there are some in-house options that can address positional needs, right? And then at the end of the podcast, we'll go over the many positional groups that the Orange, they don't need to touch for the rest of the entire offseason. Spoiler alert to that segment, most of the offense, in my opinion, is complete, okay? So that's what we're going over here on today's episode of Locked On Syracuse. It's a roster outlook on January 6th, 2025. Before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. There are two positional groups that Syracuse definitely needs to address in the transfer portal specifically, okay? The biggest remaining need of those two, and I'll get to the second one in a moment, is cornerback. When Syracuse entered this offseason and I released the first transfer portal needs video, I said that cornerback is kind of a need because Syracuse is losing Clarence Lewis, a third-team All-ACC cornerback. He's out of eligibility. They had at the time Marcellus Barnes and Jaden Bellamy, and I thought, okay, that's a decent 1-2 for next season, but I would like for the Orange to add on one more corner who can maybe start games, even if it's just a depth option as well. Well, since that video, since that podcast, Jaden Bellamy entered the portal, and he found a new home at UCF. Good for him. And then there's Marcellus Barnes, who also entered the portal, but he has still not found a home at the time of this recording. Things can change in a hurry, though, so you never know. And while I am in favor of giving young guys a chance, right? You got Davian Kerr, Ivan McDaniels, and I'm sure there are other players. Caleb Singleton, a 2025 four-star true freshman, perhaps, on Rivals. I do believe that Syracuse football needs to add at least one cornerback in the portal, preferably one that can start games. And fortunately, it appears that the staff agrees with my opinion. They agree with me on this because they are in currently on FCS All-American cornerback Sascha Garcia from William & Mary. He was offered by Syracuse, and it appears that he is going to visit the Orange. I don't have the date for you, but it appears he will visit Syracuse, according to 24/7 Sports. And by the way, if you are concerned with the fact that he is an FCS player, and I understand the concern because FCS to FBS, specifically Power 4, is a massive jump to make. But for what it's worth, here are some of the other programs that are, quote unquote, in on Garcia, or at least they have offered Garcia. You ready? Iowa, Wisconsin, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, and others. These are not necessarily cream of the crop Power 4 programs, but they are Power 4 programs. You got two Big Ten schools in there, in Iowa, Wisconsin, and you got Virginia Tech and Wake Forest, who are fellow ACC schools. So if Syracuse is thinking that he can play in the Power 4 level, and those four schools think he can play at the Power 4 level, who am I to judge whether or not Garcia can play at the Power 4 level, right? Even though he is FCS. So while it is a valid concern, it's valid, I get it. Plenty of programs are in on him. He is a 3-star transfer on 24/7 Sports. So Syracuse is going after a cornerback in the transfer portal, and it's good because they certainly could use at least one, maybe even two. But I think it's the number one need. So getting a guy like Garcia would be massive for the Orange next season. I think the other need still remains this: inside linebacker. Inside linebacker was one of the biggest needs heading into this offseason, and in my opinion, it still remains a big need. Now, it should be noted that Fran Brown got his son to commit to Syracuse in the transfer portal, so that's good for us, I guess, right? And Syracuse also recently received some good news to its linebacker room in the transfer portal. Backup linebacker Anwar Sparrow withdrew from the portal. If you recall, earlier this offseason, Sparrow entered the portal and said that he was still going to play in the bowl game. Good for him. Well, it was kind of creeping towards he was going to stay. He was kind of hinting at it on social media. And then, lo and behold, I believe it was after the bowl game, he officially withdrew from the portal, and he will be back with Syracuse next season. So when you look at their top three inside linebackers right now on the roster, you got Derek McDonald, who's got plenty of starting experience, has been with the program for a while. You got James Hurd, and you got Anwar Sparrow. I don't hate that three. I don't. But it's clearly a downgrade from what Syracuse had last season, which is Marlowe Wax, even though he was hurt for a lot of the year, and also Justin Barron. Those are two key players that you're losing on defense, right? I think they need to still add an inside linebacker. Leave a comment in the comments section below, just so that you have another player there. You have a really, really strong top four. I think you need to add one more frontline starter. Now, it appears that Syracuse is going after a linebacker, even an inside linebacker perhaps, because they were supposed to get a visit from a talented Memphis linebacker, Elijah Herring. Now, they were supposed to get the visit. I got some bad news for you all, though. He decided to commit to Florida State before going on said visit. But it does provide a clue as to which position groups this coaching staff is targeting. The fact that they are going after a cornerback in Garcia and the fact that they were in on a guy like Elijah Herring, it goes to show you that I think Syracuse football recognizes the two big needs for the Orange right now in the portal are inside linebacker and cornerback. I think that cornerback remains the number one biggest need because there's really nobody there with a ton of experience that can start. Whereas at inside linebacker, James Hurd started earlier this year. Derek McDonald has started plenty of games. Anwar Sparrow has been a backup for a long time, so you at least know he can be a depth player. But that's still a big need as well to add an inside starting linebacker. So overall, leave your comments in the comments section below as to what positional groups the Orange still definitely need to add, because coming up, we are going to talk about positions that Syracuse could look to add in the transfer portal, but overall, I think they just kind of fall in this category of they need to just figure it out. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. And guys, my Super Bowl pick this year is currently the team that is fourth in the odds to get it done. They're at plus 600 right now. And I'm not just saying this because I'm hosting a Syracuse podcast. I'm actually a New York Jets fan. I think the Buffalo Bills, I think it's their year. You can leave a comment in the comment section below. I think it's the Buffalo Bills at plus 600. I also think they're the best value for what it's worth. So I think the Bills are going to win the Super Bowl. That's my opinion there. What do you think? Who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl this year? Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I'm Jackson Holzer, and this is Locked On Syracuse. And folks, if you like what you're hearing, drop a like and hit that subscribe button. Also turn on those notifications so you know when I am dropping the next podcast. Not only is hitting that subscribe button completely free, but it also helps the channel grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. On this edition of Locked On Syracuse, we're going over some of the biggest remaining needs for the Orange in the transfer portal. We just talked about how cornerback and inside linebacker appear to still be some of the top needs for the Orange right now. And good news, the coaching staff is certainly aware of that with their most recent activity in the portal. This upcoming segment here we're going to talk about is just about positional groups that are still needs, but I don't know if they're necessarily needed in the transfer portal, and they also might just be done entirely with the unit. So really the theme of this is these are positional groups that the Orange simply need to figure out. They need to figure out what they're going to do. And the number one thing I think they need to figure out is the defensive line. Is Syracuse football done adding to its defensive line? They recently got Chris Thomas, a run-stuffing defensive lineman from Marshall in the transfer portal. And in my opinion, I think Syracuse, for the most part, is done with its defensive line. And I think it might be a better unit than it was last season. But there is one name to keep an eye on, and that's Owen Wafle from Michigan. Owen Wafle was a 2024 four-star recruit that redshirted this season, so he's got 4 years of eligibility remaining. He's a New Jersey kid, and not only that, his younger brother, Luke Wafle, is a top 70 recruit in the class of 2026, and he also has a Syracuse offer. And we know that the Orange like having sibling duos on their team. Fadil Diggs, Fatim Diggs last season. This season, you got Chris Thomas, the transfer from Marshall. They also got his younger brother in the class of 2025, Eric Thomas. Not to mention that there are plenty of family ties on Syracuse football's roster. Jeff Nixon, the offensive coordinator, Will Nixon, the running back, Fran Brown, the head coach. His son is just transferred to Syracuse as a linebacker. So it makes a lot of sense, and I would not be surprised if Syracuse got in on Owen Wafle from Michigan. But as of right now, I think it's purely speculation. I haven't seen anything directly with Syracuse and Owen Wafle. I just wouldn't be surprised, though, so keep an eye on a guy like him for their defensive line. They also need to figure out the offensive line. Okay? And there's a lot to figure out with the unit. Now, Syracuse has already added Bama tackle Naquil Betrand. And also, they, similar to Anwar Sparrow, they got good news from the transfer portal from one of their own earlier in the offseason. Backup lineman, Josh Miller, he entered the portal, and he recently withdrew from the portal. So that's good. At least it helps out the depth. And maybe he can compete for a starting job next season. You also got John Ray Reed, the starting center for the past 2 seasons, in the portal right now, and I don't think he's coming back. So there are a lot of question marks with this offensive line. What's going to happen with the starting guards from last season? You got Jacob Bradford and Mark Petrie. Remember that Diego Pavia ruling and everyone from JUCO getting that extra year of eligibility? I still don't know if it actually applies to Jacob Bradford and Mark Petrie. At this point, my assumption is it doesn't, because we've heard nothing from them since it happened. But who knows? The bottom line is that Syracuse football needs to figure out its offensive line, whether they decide to go with in-house options. They could. They got David Woolaba as a tackle. You could try Demetrius Witherspoon again at tackle, or you can move Witherspoon to guard and have Betrand be a tackle. You still need to figure out who's the center going to be. There's a couple candidates for center, and you need to figure out the guards. The entire unit you need to figure out. But I'm just not sure right now if they're going to go in the portal for another name or if they're already set in stone and they're going to go with in-house options. Leave a comment in the comment section below what you would do with Syracuse's offensive line, but that's where I'm at with the unit right now. So overall, it's really the trenches. Offensive line, defensive line are the units that kind of need to be sorted out here. Okay, defensive line, they might be done, but maybe they'll get in on Owen Wafle to try to also get his brother a top 70 recruit in 2026. And you need to figure out O-line because there are a ton of question marks with the offensive line. So coming up now, we'll talk about the positions that Syracuse is set on. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of past playoff games and can't wait to make new memories with the updated format and extra teams involved. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And recently, I used Game Time Picks to filter out tickets for an upcoming game. Browsing through the deals was a breeze, and I found great value for all kinds of seats around the venue. The Super Deal in particular stood out as the best value for the event. I love that I could see the seat views before buying, and that the app shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code Locked On College, LOCKED, ONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I got good news, Syracuse fans. There are a lot of position groups, particularly on offense, that are set in stone and I think are actually pretty strong units for this team, okay? So Syracuse football this offseason, I think, has done a pretty solid job despite a lot of their losses that they have had. So let's go over the offense. Basically, every single unit on that side of the ball has been addressed, except for the O-line. The O-line is the one question mark right now where we don't know whether or not Syracuse football is going to add to it in the portal or not. We can talk about quarterback, and we've talked a lot about quarterback here on this podcast. The Orange already have their backup plan in place. It's Rickie Collins, who's part of the backup plan, I should say, competing for the starting job in 2025. That's the backup plan. And for what it's worth, it was the only plan that really made sense because we know what plan A is, which is trying to get Kyle McCord back. But at least with getting Rickie Collins, you have insurance on the quarterback battle next season. They at least brought in someone who's going to compete with Jakari Williams and Luke Carney and Rich Bellin and maybe even Michael Johnson for the starting job next season. And plan A remains Kyle McCord as of right now and trying to get him that extra year of eligibility. So they don't need to touch quarterback here in the portal anymore. You also got running back. I don't think they need to add a running back in the portal. I truly don't. Yeah, LeQuint Allen left, but with Yassine Willis and Will Nixon on the roster, and maybe there's a running back like Jaden Hart or Malachi James that can step up next season and be a better depth piece for the Orange, I don't see them really trying to spend big on a running back in the transfer portal. Maybe they go look and try to add another depth piece. They actually did that last season with Will Nixon. They got him in, I want to say May, and it made a lot of sense to get him. They could go a similar route, but it's not a big addressing need despite the fact that LeQuint Allen left. It's more of, okay, can the current in-house options take over for LeQuint Allen? And then if they don't this season, then we'll know that the Orange need a running back in 2026. Sound good there? Okay. You also got wide receiver. They're good at wide receiver, guys. Yeah, they're losing Jackson Meeks. It's a bummer, right? They're losing Jackson Meeks. But they've already added 2 depth receivers in the portal, Chris Long from Rutgers and Tyshawn Russell from South Carolina. You got Trevor Pena, the starting slot receiver, second team All-ACC, a big breakout star from this past season. He's returning. That's great. And to be honest with you all, once the Pena news came out that he was going to return, wide receiver really just, it became kind of moot. They didn't really need one anymore because they got a lot of depth at the position, and there are plenty of guys who, in my opinion, can take the next step in their development. We talked about it a lot yesterday with guys like Darryl Gill and Zeed Haynes and Justice Ross Simmons and Emmanuel Ross, and you still got Amari Hatcher there. So they don't need wide receiver in the transfer portal. They are good, despite the fact that they are losing Jackson Meeks. And then you got tight end. Syracuse football, I don't think, has been linked to a tight end at any point in the offseason in the portal. I don't think they have. I keep refreshing, trying to find it. I can't find it. They're losing Oronde Gadsden. He's going pro. But they got Jamie Tremble, a 2024 four-star tight end. Who knows if he's going to be good or not? We have to see him on the field. But he certainly has decent expectations given his recruiting class rankings, the fact that he redshirted, the fact that, hey, he's basically the profile of Oronde Gadsden. I don't think they need a touch tight end in the portal. Plus, you got Dan Villari coming back. Dan Villari is a solid blocking tight end. He's a Wildcat quarterback because he's a former quarterback recruit at Michigan. They don't need a touch tight end in the portal at all. They really don't. They're good. And they haven't really needed to all season, or all off season, I should say. There was that podcast that I did at the very beginning of the off season around signing day saying, hey, there's this tight end from Purdue who entered the portal, Tavion Galloway. I only wanted Syracuse to really pursue him just because, hey, if they could somehow get him, then they might be able to get his brother, who is a four-star cornerback recruit in 2025, Dwayne Galloway. But once Dwayne Galloway committed to West Virginia on signing day, then there was no use in really recruiting Tavion Galloway from Purdue. So they don't really need a tight end in the portal at all. And then when you look at defense, I think there's one unit on the defense that is set. And I think that's safety, which is kind of interesting. And I'll get to in a second here. You got Elijah Clark, who declared for the NFL draft. But Syracuse football still retains Deuce Chestnut. They still retain Devin Grant. And they have a 2025 consensus four-star player in Demetrius Samuel, who I think at minimum is going to push for playing time next season, if not be a starter for the Orange next season. So you're good at safety. Okay. Now, what I find interesting is that Syracuse football may not necessarily agree with my assessment, and that's okay because you know what? I'm just a fan. I'm a podcast host. I'm an alum. I don't ultimately make the decisions for Syracuse football. The reason why I say this is because the Orange, they were pursuing TCU transfer Richard Toney, but he committed to Purdue before he ever visited Syracuse, but they were going after him. I think they had a visit scheduled, but he decided to go to Purdue. I guess good for him, right? So I guess my thought is this. This is my question right now, and I can't really answer it for you. Is Syracuse football done adding at safety? Because I don't think they need one, but they were pursuing one. Is it the fact that they believed that Toney would have just been awesome for Syracuse and they were going to make an exception for him? Or is it a sign that, you know what, they really do believe they need another safety in there? I'm not sure which one it is. So maybe you can help me out. Leave a comment in the comment section below. But overall, I really don't think they need a touch safety. I think they're fine. So I guess the units that don't really need to be touched for the rest of the offseason, the position groups that are set, on offense, it's every positional group except for the O-line. You got quarterback with Rickie Collins and hopefully Kyle McCord coming back. You got running back. Yeah, LeQuint Allen left, but Yassine Willis, Will Nixon are still there, and plenty of others. Receiver, they've already added 2 depth guys. Pena's returning, and there's plenty of others on the roster that could have breakout seasons. And then tight end has never been a need in the transfer portal because you got a guy like Jamie Tremble waiting in the wings. On defense, it's safety. And that's it. Every other unit on the defense, D-line is a question still. Linebacker, certainly they need to add. And cornerback, they certainly need to add. So those are the position groups they don't need to touch, okay? As far as what is coming up on the podcast in the future, be on the lookout because tomorrow morning, there will be a podcast dropping. Yes, tomorrow morning, folks. Neil Adler from Inside the Loud House, okay? I've had him on the podcast many times here as a guest, always a great guest. We're going to talk some Syracuse basketball in a full podcast. I don't know when the last time I did a full podcast on Syracuse basketball was, aside from being a post-game reaction. So it's going to certainly be interesting. Neil Adler wrote an article, a pretty negative article about Syracuse basketball. And the reason why I want to have him on is because he's one of the most positive people that I know. And so if he's fed up with the program, oh boy, we got some big problems there with Syracuse basketball. So that's coming out tomorrow morning. Okay. Tomorrow evening. Syracuse basketball. They're playing Georgia Tech. I believe it's at home at 7 p.m. Eastern, and there will be a full post-game reaction podcast. Okay, so that's what's coming up, plus any breaking news that occurs. I'm sure there will be breaking news in the coming days, particularly with Kyle McCord. I think we're going to get an answer in one way, shape, or form very, very soon, as well as with the NCAA and potentially giving everyone a 5th year of eligibility. There's a lot that could still break here. So, you know what, folks? You know what you want to do? You want to hit that like button on this video, and then you want to hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On ACC podcast. Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs, they keep it real and bring you the truth about where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. You can find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. And everyone, I'll see you all again tomorrow morning.